I'm recording this video with permission from Scholastic. So welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be reading chapter 2 of the Tale of Despereaux. So if you missed our first one, go back and check out that video, and we're going to be reading chapter 2. So we left off last chapter with Despereaux, this little mouse who wasn't supposed to live, being born, and we learned that he's named after the sorrow and the sadness, and his parents don't think he's going to live. And the last little bit that we read last chapter, it says his eyes were opening too early and the parents just think he was going to die. But he says, but reader, he did live. This is his story. So I want you to stop and think, maybe just like, what intrigues you about this? It's clearly the author is telling us that she has a really extravagant story to tell us. But so far, all we've learned is he's this little helpless mouse that everybody thinks is going to die. So I want you guys to maybe stop and make a prediction. I know we don't have a lot of information to go off of, but like, what's your initial inkling? What do you think? What do you think's in store for this mouse? So we're going to move on to chapter 2, called Such a Disappointment. Despereaux Tilling lived, but his existence was cause for much speculation in the mouse community. "He's the smallest mouse I've ever seen," said his Aunt Florence. "It's ridiculous. No mouse has ever been born this small, not even a Tilling." She looked at Despereaux through narrowed eyes as if she expected him to disappear entirely. "No mouse," she said. "Ever." Despereaux, his tail wrapped around his feet, stared back at her. "Those are some big ears he's got, too," observed his Uncle Alfred. "They look more like donkey ears, if you ask me." "They're obscenely large ears," said Florence. Despereaux wiggled his ears. His Aunt Florence gasped. "They say he was born with his eyes open." "They say he was born with his eyes open," whispered Uncle Alfred. Despereaux stared at his uncle. "Impossible," said Aunt Florence. "No mouse, no matter how small or obscenely large-eared, is ever born with his eyes open. It simply isn't done." "His pa, Lester, says he's not well," said Uncle Alfred. Despereaux sneezed. He said nothing in defense of himself. How could he? Everything his aunt and uncle said was true. He was ridiculously small. His ears were obscenely large, and he had been born with his eyes open. And he was sickly. He coughed and sneezed so often that he carried a handkerchief in one paw at all times. He ran temperatures. He fainted at loud noises. Most alarming of all, he showed no interest in the things a mouse should show interest in. He did not think constantly for food. He was not intent on tracking down every crumb. While his larger, older siblings ate, Despereaux stood with his head cocked to one side, holding very still. "Do you hear that sweet sound?" he said. "I hear the sound of cake crumbs falling out of people's mouths and hitting the floor," said his brother Toulouse. "That's what I hear." "No," said Despereaux. "It's something else. It sounds like, honey." "You might have big ears," said Toulouse, "but they're not attached right to your brain. You don't hear honey. You smell honey, when there's honey to smell, which there isn't." "Son," barked Despereaux's father, "snap to it. Get your head out of the clouds and hunt for crumbs." "Please," said his mother, "look for the crumbs. Eat them to make your mama happy. You are such a skinny mouse. You are a disappointment to your mama." "Sorry," said Despereaux. He lowered his head and sniffed the castle floor. But reader, he was not smelling. He was listening with his big ears to the sweet sound that no other mouse seemed to hear. So that's the end of our chapter. I know that they're pretty short, so some days I might read more than one chapter, but I want you to take a second to notice how the author ends these chapters. We listen to the dialogue of Despereaux interacting with his family, but then we see here that the author kind of interjects her voice into the story. So we have the whole dialogue. Despereaux said this, his mother said this, but then we hear the author directly talking to us, the reader, and they say, "But reader, he was not smelling. He was listening with his big ears to the sweet sound that no other mouse seemed to hear." And earlier in our first chapter, we heard a similar, there was a similar writing style where they said, "But reader, he did live. This is his story." So that's another writing tactic that you can use if any of you guys are working on stories at home, and you want to tell the story of somebody else, but you want to pull your reader in. You could use Kate DiCamillo's tactic of saying, "But reader, this is really the full story," or "But reader, little do you know," or something like that. Labeling the reader in the story is a really great way to draw you in, because I don't know about you, but I am very drawn in by the author talking to us, the readers, like this. So that is chapter 2. Please stay tuned for our next video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.